The low hum of the server racks was the only constant companion Dr. Aris Thorne knew in the sterile, almost otherworldly silence of his laboratory. Dust motes danced in the slivers of artificial light that pierced the gloom, a subtle ballet of forgotten particles in a room where the cosmos itself was dissected. Outside, a late autumn chill had settled over Pasadena, California, wrapping the sprawling campus of Caltech in a damp grey shroud. The air, heavy with the scent of impending rain and the distant unseen exhaust fumes of the nearby freeway, pressed against the thick, insulated walls of the astrophysics department, as if trying to force its way into this sanctuary of pure intellect. The clock on the wall, a minimalist design, ticked with an almost imperceptible rhythm, marking not just the passage of minutes but the slow, inexorable march of a truth waiting to be unearthed. Nothing, Aris felt deep in his bones, was destined to remain the same after tonight. A profound, unsettling stillness permeated the lab, a silence so complete that it seemed to amplify the whispers of the universe he sought to understand. It wasn't merely the absence of sound, it was the quiet before a storm, a prelude to a revelation that promised to reshape not just his understanding, but perhaps humanity's entire perception of its place among the stars. He leaned closer to the monitor, his gaze fixed on the anomaly. It wasn't a glitch, not a simple error in data transmission, nor was it the predictable noise of cosmic background radiation. No, this was different. This was a pattern, faint yet persistent, emerging from the vast, churning ocean of data collected by the Kepler Space Telescope. He had been sifting through exoplanetary transits, a task usually as monotonous as it was critical, searching for the subtle dip in starlight that signified a planet passing before its sun. For months, it had been the same routine. Endless lines of code, statistical analyses, and the occasional fleeting thrill of a confirmed candidate. But this wasn't a standard planetary signature. The periodicity was off, the magnitude fluctuating in a way that defied known astrophysical phenomena. It was too regular to be random, too complex to be natural, at least by any definition he was familiar with. His fingers, calloused from years of typing and the occasional clumsy handling of delicate equipment, hovered over the keyboard, a slight tremor betraying the calm exterior he usually presented. A sudden, sharp spike on the spectrographic analysis caught his eye, an unexpected burst of high-energy radiation emanating from the same region of space. It was brief, almost imperceptible, a ghostly echo against the cosmic symphony, yet it left a distinct imprint. His heart, usually a steady, rational drumbeat, lurched in his chest, a strange, cold dread coiling in his stomach. It wasn't fear in the traditional sense, more a profound sense of foreboding, a chilling premonition that something monumental was stirring. He'd felt this sensation before, years ago, when he was just a grad student, poring over ancient Sumerian tablets in a dusty museum library. He'd dismissed it then as youthful exuberance, an overactive imagination fueled by too much caffeine and too many late nights. But the feeling now was far more potent, more insistent. It was a fragment of a memory, buried deep beneath layers of scientific rigor and academic skepticism. A fleeting image of cuneiform script and winged figures, whispering tales of a sky god and a hidden planet. It was illogical, unscientific, a phantom thought, yet it clung to him with the tenacity of a half-forgotten dream. Why did that specific memory surface now, after all these years? It made no sense. He shook his head, trying to dislodge the irrational thought, to push it back into the subconscious archives where it belonged. But the image persisted, a silent, insistent echo against the logic of his present reality. This was a scientific anomaly, a puzzle, not some ancient myth. Or was it? The cold dread intensified, a subtle current flowing through his veins, tightening his muscles. He felt observed, not by human eyes, but by something ancient and vast, something that had always been there, just beyond the veil of human perception, now slowly, deliberately, pulling back that veil. The air in the lab, already cool, seemed to drop a few more degrees, sending a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the thermostat. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts, to compartmentalize the unsettling feeling, to focus on the data. But the data itself seemed to hum with an unspoken secret, a silent language he was only just beginning to decipher. This wasn't just an astronomical observation. It felt like a message, a sign, a reawakening. And with that thought, a peculiar, almost electric sensation prickled at the back of his neck, as if a long dormant circuit had just clicked into place. Aris was a man sculpted by academia and late-night caffeine, a figure usually found amidst the controlled chaos of data streams and astronomical charts. His life was a meticulous equation of observations, calculations, and peer-reviewed papers. He was 42, though his perpetually furrowed brow and the faint lines etched around his intelligent hazel eyes often made him seem older, burdened by the weight of the universe's unresolved questions. He wore his intellectual prowess like a second skin, a defense mechanism against the chaotic uncertainties of the human condition. His usual attire consisted of faded jeans, a well-worn Caltech hoodie, and a pair of sensible running shoes. A uniform that spoke of practicality over pretense and a readiness for sudden late-night dashes to the campus observatory. His hair, a receding tide of dark brown, was often disheveled, a testament to restless nights spent wrestling with complex algorithms. His hands, though nimble with a keyboard, often betrayed a subtle fidget, a sign of his restless mind, always seeking the next problem to solve, the next mystery to unravel. He lived alone in a small, unassuming bungalow off Raymond Avenue, a place filled with books, dusty antique telescopes, and the faint, comforting scent of stale coffee. His social life was minimal, limited mostly to departmental colloquiums and the occasional awkward faculty mixer where he felt profoundly out of place, like a celestial object adrift in a sea of terrestrial small talk. He wasn't antisocial, merely preoccupied. His true companions were the stars, the distant galaxies, and the intricate dance of planetary mechanics. What he sought, more than anything, was truth, an objective, quantifiable understanding of the cosmos. He feared ignorance, the blind acceptance of unsubstantiated beliefs, and the easy comfort of narratives that offered answers without evidence. He carried with him, though he rarely acknowledged it, a profound sense of loneliness, an almost existential solitude born from spending so much time contemplating the vast emptiness of space. He tried to forget a past filled with questions his scientific training deemed irrational, questions about ancient civilizations, impossible structures, and the persistent whispers of a world far older and stranger than modern history allowed. He dismissed it as youthful fancy, a detour into the realms of fringe archaeology, before the stern hand of astrophysics guided him back to the quantifiable. Yet this anomaly, this peculiar signature from the Kepler data, was chipping away at his carefully constructed edifice of skepticism. He tried to overlay the anomalous readings with known celestial events, supernovae remnants, rogue comets, even the distant echoes of gravitational waves, but nothing fit. The patterns were too deliberate, too organized, almost intelligent. He pulled up historical star charts, cross-referencing ancient observations with his current data. It was a long shot, a desperate measure, but something about the persistent feeling in his gut urged him on. He remembered a dusty textbook from his undergraduate days, an obscure volume on ancient Mesopotamian astronomy filled with diagrams of constellations that seemed to shift and align in impossible ways. He'd scoffed at it then, dismissing it as archaic pseudoscience, but now a flicker of curiosity, cold and persistent, ignited within him. He zoomed in on the spectrographic spike, enhancing the signal. A faint, almost subliminal image coalesced within the static. A symbol. It was a stylized, 8-pointed star, or perhaps a starburst, intricately woven with what looked like a series of concentric circles. It was remarkably similar, disturbingly so, to symbols he had seen in those long-forgotten Sumerian texts, representations of celestial bodies, sometimes even deities. He recoiled slightly from the screen, his breath catching in his throat. It was impossible. A symbol, a literal glyph embedded in cosmic data? His mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Lens flare, an atmospheric aberration, electromagnetic interference. He ran a dozen diagnostic protocols, scrubbing the data, recalibrating the sensors, checking for any possible contamination. Each time, the symbol, faint but undeniable, re-emerged from the noise, a spectral tattoo on the raw data. If this beginning has already made you rethink what you knew, imagine what's coming next. So go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Because here, every video reveals something few dare to show. The cold fear that had pricked at him earlier now settled into a deep, pervasive chill, burrowing into his bones. This wasn't just an anomaly, it was a deliberate mark, a cosmic signature imprinted onto the fabric of reality. The sudden, inexplicable appearance of this symbol, a clear, unmistakable design, in data meant to be purely scientific and objective, shattered the comfortable illusion of his rational world. It was a direct affront to everything he, Dr. Aris Thorne, a man of science, believed in. He felt a profound sense of disorientation, as if the ground beneath his feet had suddenly shifted, revealing an abyss he never knew existed. His perfectly ordered universe, governed by predictable laws and observable phenomena, was now riddled with an impossible variable. He spent the next several hours in a frantic, almost obsessive dive into cross-referencing. He pulled up every available image of eight-pointed stars, ancient symbols, astrological charts, and historical artifacts. His lab, usually a sanctuary of digital order, began to resemble an archaeological dig, with multiple monitors displaying disparate images. He found variations of the eight-pointed star across countless ancient cultures. The Star of Ishtar, symbols in Egyptian hieroglyphs, even a faint resemblance in some Native American petroglyphs. But the specific combination of the starburst with the concentric circles, particularly the precise number of rings, matched only one consistent source: the iconography of the ancient Sumerians, specifically depictions associated with their celestial deities and the enigmatic planet known as Nibiru. The very name sent a jolt through him, a resonance with those long-suppressed memories of dusty library archives and forbidden texts. His mind raced, a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. How could an ancient symbol, carved into stone tablets thousands of years ago in Mesopotamia, manifest in the raw, unfiltered data of a cutting-edge space telescope observing a distant star system? The logical leaps required were monumental, defying every principle of physics and astronomy he held sacred. It was as if someone or something had deliberately placed a breadcrumb, a clue across the vast expanse of space and time, solely for him to find. The implications were staggering, terrifying. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of exhilaration and dread, a primal instinct screaming both discovery and danger. His eyes, strained and bloodshot from hours of staring at screens, burned, but he couldn't tear himself away. He was hooked, caught in the undertow of a mystery that transcended his professional curiosity. He remembered a quote from a forgotten philosopher: "The greatest mysteries are not those that are unknown, but those that are believed to be known." He had always considered himself a seeker of the unknown, but this was twisting his perception of what was known, challenging the very bedrock of scientific consensus. The silence in the lab, once comforting, now felt oppressive, as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting for him to connect the dots. The weight of the discovery, or rather the puzzle it presented, pressed down on him, a physical burden on his shoulders. He felt a peculiar blend of intellectual excitement and a deep, gnawing anxiety. The scientific community, his peers, his mentors, they would laugh him out of the observatory. Ancient symbols in cosmic data? Thorne, have you finally lost your mind? He could almost hear the condescending tones of Dr. Evelyn Reed, his department head, whose pragmatic skepticism was legendary. Yet the evidence, however bizarre, was right there. It defied Occam's razor, twisting the simplest explanation into an intricate, impossible knot. Aris decided he needed a different perspective, a fresh pair of eyes, even if only metaphorically. He opened a new search tab, moving away from astrophysics databases and towards historical linguistics and archaeology forums. He typed in Sumerian celestial symbols and Nibiru iconography. The results were a dizzying array of academic papers, conspiracy theories, and passionate debates. He meticulously filtered through the noise, looking for reputable sources, but even within academic circles, the topic of Nibiru was fraught with controversy, often relegated to the fringes of archaeoastronomy. Zecharia Sitchin's controversial interpretations of Sumerian texts immediately popped up, detailing theories of an unseen planet and extraterrestrial beings called the Anunnaki. Aris had always dismissed Sitchin as a pseudo-historian, but now a chilling curiosity compelled him to read. He found himself devouring articles, his scientific brain battling with the ancient narratives unfolding before him. The texts described the Anunnaki as those who from heaven to earth came, a race of advanced beings who supposedly engineered humanity and imparted knowledge, particularly astronomical knowledge. The more he read, the more the pieces, however improbable, began to align in a disturbing mosaic. The Sumerians, an ancient civilization thriving in Mesopotamia thousands of years ago, possessed an astonishingly accurate understanding of the solar system, including planets far beyond the reach of the naked eye. Their detailed star charts and cosmological myths spoke of a 12th planet, Nibiru, often depicted with that exact 8-pointed star symbol. They even described its elliptical orbit, a trajectory that would bring it into close proximity with Earth only once every several thousand years. This was an understanding far beyond what simple observation from Earth could have provided. It hinted at advanced knowledge that seemed to have been given. He remembered a lecture he'd attended as a grad student, a visiting professor from MIT, discussing the Fermi paradox, the contradiction between the high probability of extraterrestrial life and the lack of observable evidence for it. The professor had mused, almost jokingly, perhaps they were here and we simply forgot or misunderstood their presence. Aris had chuckled then, filing it away as an amusing academic diversion. Now, the memory brought a cold wave of realization. What if the forgetting was deliberate? What if the misunderstanding was engineered? The thought was a seismic shift in his intellectual landscape. He stretched, his muscles protesting the prolonged stillness. The lab was now bathed in the soft, pre-dawn glow filtering through the high windows, painting the monitors with a faint, ethereal light. The city outside was still mostly asleep, oblivious to the quiet revolution occurring within these walls. He felt an intense loneliness, a profound isolation in his discovery. Who would believe him? Who could he even talk to about this without sounding like he belonged in a straitjacket? His scientific integrity demanded absolute proof, undeniable evidence, yet the evidence he had was so far beyond conventional understanding that it risked destroying his credibility entirely. He knew he had to proceed with extreme caution to gather every shred of data, every possible correlation, before even whispering a word to anyone. The weight of this secret, still nascent, already felt immense. He was an astrophysicist, a man of stars, not a mythologist, but the stars themselves seemed to be whispering ancient myths, beckoning him into a labyrinth of forgotten truths. He felt like an unwitting protagonist in a story that had begun millennia before his birth, a story he was now inexplicably destined to continue. The sun finally rose, painting the eastern sky in hues of soft orange and lilac, a stark contrast to the stark digital world Aris inhabited. He hadn't slept, couldn't. His mind was a maelstrom of data, ancient texts, and the chilling implications of their intersection. He ran countless simulations, trying to extrapolate the trajectory of an object that would produce such a peculiar spectroscopic signature. He fed the Kepler data into his most advanced orbital mechanics models, adjusting variables, testing hypotheses. The results were consistently baffling. The object wasn't following a standard elliptical path around its host star. It exhibited strange, almost gravitational nudges, as if being subtly steered, or perhaps responding to forces entirely unknown to modern physics. His gaze drifted to a framed photograph on his desk, a picture of him and his mentor, Professor Alistair Finch, taken years ago at an astronomy conference. Finch, with his twinkling eyes and perpetually rumpled tweed jacket, had always encouraged Aris's unconventional curiosities, even when they veered into the speculative. "Don't be afraid to chase the wild goose, Aris," he'd often say. "Sometimes that's where the real discoveries are hiding." A wave of longing washed over Aris. Finch was retired now, living in a quiet cottage in Maine, his mind still sharp but his body frail. Aris wondered if he should call him, if Finch would understand, or if he would simply attribute it to exhaustion and overwork. The thought of Finch's calm, analytical mind, unfazed by the outlandish, was a comforting balm in the whirlwind of his own thoughts. He decided against it for now. He needed more data, more correlations, more proof. He needed to build an unassailable case before presenting anything to anyone. The symbol, the anomalous readings, the Sumerian connection. It was all too much, too far-fetched for a single, sleep-deprived astrophysicist to claim without being labeled a crank. He knew the scientific world's brutal capacity for dismissal, its intolerance for anything that challenged its established paradigms without overwhelming evidence. He was acutely aware of the risk, not just to his career, but to his entire identity as a rational, objective scientist. A notification pinged on his secondary monitor, an email from Dr. Reed, reminding him about the upcoming departmental review of his exoplanet research. The irony was almost palpable. He was supposed to be preparing a report on unremarkable stellar transits, while a secret that could rewrite human history was bubbling just beneath the surface of his official work. He sighed, rubbing his temples. The pressure was mounting, both from within and without. He felt like a man walking a tightrope across an abyss, with the wind picking up around him. The air in the lab, which had seemed to lighten with the dawn, now felt thick again, pregnant with unspoken questions. He looked at the monitors, at the persistent, baffling data, and then back at the photograph of Professor Finch, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Finch would have loved this. He would have torn it apart with delightful ferocity, seeking every flaw, every logical inconsistency. And then, if it held, he would have championed it with the same unwavering conviction. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has truly resonated with you. So strengthen this content, like it now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. Aris began to weave a double life. By day, he maintained his facade as a diligent, albeit somewhat withdrawn, astrophysicist, attending meetings, overseeing graduate students, and contributing to collaborative projects. He'd offer vague, non-committal answers when asked about his progress, citing complex data irregularities and unusual stellar noise. Truths, in a sense, but carefully masked. By night, however, his lab transformed into a clandestine command center, a sanctuary where he delved deeper into the rabbit hole. He cross-referenced his Kepler data with archival satellite imagery, looking for any terrestrial connections, any historical sites that might resonate with the ancient Sumerian accounts. He learned basic cuneiform, spending hours hunched over online dictionaries and translation guides, slowly, painstakingly deciphering fragments of old texts that spoke of heavenly visitors and the planet of the crossing. He discovered that the Sumerian epic of Enuma Elish, often dismissed as a mere creation myth, contained astonishingly detailed astronomical descriptions. It spoke of Tiamat, a primordial goddess personified as a chaotic ocean, and Marduk, who split Tiamat in two to create earth and the heavens. But more intriguing were the mentions of a celestial body, Nibiru, described as a bright celestial body that journeyed through the solar system, influencing the orbits of other planets. The language was mythological, yes, but the underlying astronomical details, when stripped of their poetic embellishments, felt unnervingly precise. The alignment of the planets, the descriptions of celestial collisions, it echoed modern astrophysical theories of planetary formation, yet written millennia before telescopes were even conceived. It was as if the ancients possessed a knowledge they shouldn't have. One afternoon, while reviewing a particularly obscure Sumerian astronomical tablet from the British Museum's digital archives, he noticed a subtle detail. Alongside the eight-pointed star symbol for Nibiru, there was another, fainter glyph, almost like a superscript. It was a small, angular design, reminiscent of a stylized arrow or a spearhead pointing towards the star. He'd overlooked it before, dismissing it as a common cuneiform stroke. But now, with his mind primed to connect disparate elements, he saw it differently. It wasn't just an arrow. It was an indicator, a directional marker. It seemed to suggest a specific trajectory, a vector linked to the appearance of Nibiru. He returned to his Kepler data, his heart pounding with a fresh burst of adrenaline. Could it be? Could this ancient glyph, this simple arrow, be a clue to the anomalous gravitational nudges he'd observed? He began to manipulate his simulations, inputting hypothetical gravitational influences based on the directional inference of the arrow glyph. He tried various parameters, adjusting for unknown masses, exotic energy fields. For hours, nothing. Then, just as frustration began to set in, a new variable, a subtle ripple in the gravitational field, caused a sudden, dramatic shift in the simulation. The anomalous signature in his data, the one that had defied all conventional explanation, suddenly stabilized. The object's trajectory, while still unusual, now fit a coherent, albeit highly complex, orbital model. It was as if an unseen hand had been guiding it, not a random force, but a deliberate, intelligent influence. The eight-pointed star, the concentric circles, and now this subtle directional marker. It was no longer just an anomaly. It was a message. And that message was pointing to something vast, something ancient, something that had been patiently waiting for humanity to rediscover it. The air in the lab grew heavy with the weight of this implication, a silent, profound hum that vibrated not just in the server racks, but in the very core of Aris's being. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The scientific puzzle wasn't just about identifying an unknown celestial body, it was about deciphering an ancient, meticulously hidden instruction manual. The Sumerians hadn't just observed Nibiru, they had documented its behavior, its influence, and perhaps even its purpose, encoded in their myths and astronomical tablets. The arrowglyph, so subtle, so easily dismissed, was the key. It wasn't simply a marker, it was a vector, a precise instruction on how to interpret the gravitational fluctuations. The Anunnaki, if they truly existed, weren't just visitors. They were cosmic architects, celestial engineers who had left behind breadcrumbs of their return, knowing that one day an inquisitive mind would piece together their ancient codex. His internal thoughts spiraled into a storm of awe and terror. This went beyond scientific discovery. It was a paradigm shift. If he was right, then entire fields of study, archaeology, history, astronomy, even theology, would be irrevocably altered. The very foundations of human civilization, our understanding of our origins, our place in the universe, would be shattered and rebuilt. And what would be built in its place? A future shaped by the knowledge of beings who had walked among us millennia ago, beings who were now perhaps preparing to return. The sheer scale of it was mind-boggling, almost too much for a single human mind to fully comprehend. He felt a profound sense of responsibility, a heavy mantle settling upon his shoulders. He, Aris Thorne, a humble astrophysicist from Pasadena, had stumbled upon a secret that could either elevate humanity or plunge it into an existential crisis. He considered sharing his findings, but the imagined ridicule, the accusations of pseudoscience, the very real threat to his career, held him back. Who would believe him? He needed more than just correlations. He needed irrefutable, undeniable proof that would stand up to the most rigorous scientific scrutiny. He needed to find a way to make his colleagues see what he saw, not through ancient texts, but through the cold, hard lens of modern astrophysics. He knew that the only way to bridge the chasm between ancient myth and modern science was with data, and lots of it. He began to devise a new observational strategy, focusing on the specific region of space indicated by the Sumerian vector, cross-referencing every known astronomical event, every faint signal, every whisper from the cosmic background. He became a ghost in his own lab, working in the shadows, fueled by an obsessive drive that bordered on madness. His personal life, already sparse, evaporated entirely. Friends stopped calling, emails went unanswered, his small bungalow became a mere waypoint for sleep, a brief respite before returning to the glowing screens. His reflection in the darkened monitor showed a gaunt, wild-eyed man, his hair more disheveled than usual, his clothes perpetually wrinkled. He hardly recognized himself. He was no longer just Aris Thorne, astrophysicist. He was Aris Thorne, the keeper of a forbidden secret, a solitary sentinel at the edge of humanity's perceived reality. The silence of the lab, once a comfort, now felt like a complicit presence, a vast ancient entity watching his every move, waiting for him to connect the final dots. He felt a shiver, not of cold, but of profound unease, as if the very air hummed with an anticipation that wasn't his own. The weeks that followed were a blur of caffeine-fueled nights and sun-drenched yet unnoticed days. Aris's routine blurred the lines between waking and dreaming, between scientific rigor and mythic obsession. He was losing weight, his skin had a pallid, almost translucent quality, and his eyes, usually sharp and focused, now carried a haunted, distant look. He knew he was pushing himself to the brink, but the urgency of his quest, the overwhelming sense that time was running out, drove him relentlessly forward. He felt a pressure that transcended the academic, a cosmic imperative whispering in the quiet corners of his mind. He focused his efforts on a new set of data, gravitational lensing aberrations. These subtle distortions of space-time, caused by massive objects bending light, were notoriously difficult to detect and interpret. But if Nibiru was truly as massive as the Sumerian texts implied, and if its trajectory was being influenced by some unseen force, then it should leave a distinct, however faint, gravitational footprint. He used a new algorithm, one he had been developing for years, designed to detect infinitesimal distortions in the fabric of space. It was a long shot, a needle in a cosmic haystack, but he was beyond conventional methods. He was now operating on instinct, guided by the improbable logic of ancient wisdom. Then, one stormy night, as rain lashed against the lab windows and thunder rumbled across the San Gabriel Mountains, an alert flashed on his main monitor. It was a statistical outlier, a tiny ripple in the gravitational field originating from the precise region of space indicated by the Sumerian aeroglyph and his extrapolated trajectory. It was barely above the noise threshold, a whisper in the cosmic roar, but it was there, and it was moving. The ripple wasn't static. It had a clear, albeit incredibly slow, progression. He immediately cross-referenced it with his Kepler data, overlaying the gravitational aberration onto the spectroscopic signature. The patterns aligned with a horrifying precision. The anomalous shifts, the periodic fluctuations, they were all consistent with a massive, unseen object, moving on a highly eccentric, long-period orbit, influenced by a gravitational field that was itself strangely modulated. A new realization, chilling in its implications, washed over him. The nudges he had observed weren't random, nor were they purely natural. They were precisely timed, almost rhythmic. It was as if Nibiru wasn't just a planet. It was a celestial clock, an ancient instrument designed to mark vast epochs of time, its every passage a deliberate event. And the gravitational modulations, the subtle ripples in space-time, they suggested a complex, intelligently designed propulsion or guidance system. This wasn't a rogue planet, it was a cosmic vessel, an immense artifact, slowly but surely making its way through the solar system, guided by forces unknown, yet hinted at by cultures long dead. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has truly resonated with you. So strengthen this content, like it now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. The revelation hit him with the force of a supernova. Nibiru wasn't just a planet or even a cosmic vessel. It was an instrument, a meticulously crafted celestial mechanism, designed not just to traverse space, but to interact with it, to influence gravitational fields, and perhaps to orchestrate the very fabric of existence within its sphere of influence. The nudges were not just modulations, they were precise, calculated adjustments, as if the entire system was a colossal slow-motion ballet, choreographed by unseen hands. The implications were mind-bending, stretching the limits of his scientific understanding to their breaking point. This wasn't science fiction. This was a terrifying, awe-inspiring reality unfolding before his very eyes. He felt a profound sense of cosmic vertigo, as if the ground beneath him had vanished, leaving him adrift in an ocean of impossible truths. His mind raced, desperately trying to integrate this new understanding into his existing framework of reality. If Nibiru was guided, then by whom, and for what purpose? The Sumerian texts, once dismissed as myth, now took on a terrifying new weight. They spoke of the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, as gods who created humanity, who imparted knowledge, who established civilizations. What if their return, marked by the slow approach of Nibiru, was not a simple visitation, but a re-establishment of an ancient order? The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. He wasn't just observing a scientific anomaly. He was witnessing the reawakening of an ancient cosmic presence. He remembered a line from one of the translated Sumerian texts: "When the great star returns, the old ways shall be remembered, and the lords of heaven shall reclaim their dominion." He had dismissed it as poetic metaphor then, but now it resonated with a chilling, literal precision. The words echoed in the silent lab, amplified by the rhythmic hum of the servers, each hum a heartbeat in the colossal machinery of the universe. He felt a growing sense of unease, a pervasive feeling of being watched, not by human eyes, but by something far older, far more powerful, something that had been patiently waiting in the cosmic shadows, its gaze fixed on humanity for millennia. The air in the lab grew heavy, almost oppressive. He glanced around, half expecting to see a shadowy figure emerge from the corners of the room, a spectral Anunnaki silently observing his frantic discoveries. The rational part of his brain screamed at him to stop, to dismiss it all as an elaborate hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation and stress. But the data, cold and empirical, defied such easy dismissal. It was all there, the spectroscopic signature, the gravitational aberration, the perfect alignment with ancient texts. The evidence was overwhelming and terrifying. Aris stood, his legs stiff, his back aching. He paced the small confines of the lab, his thoughts spiraling. He was no longer just an astrophysicist, he was an involuntary participant in a cosmic drama, a play that had been set in motion long before the first human civilization arose. The scale of it was immense, terrifying. His role, it seemed, was to be the unwitting messenger, the one who would translate the ancient codex into a language humanity could understand. But what would happen then? What would humanity do with such knowledge? Would it unite us or tear us apart? Would it lead to enlightenment or to chaos? He felt a profound sense of isolation, burdened by a truth too vast for any single individual to carry. He decided to run one more simulation, a predictive model based on the newly refined orbital parameters of Nibiru and the subtle gravitational modulations. He input all the data, the ancient texts, the scientific observations, even the symbolic interpretations of the Sumerian glyphs. The simulation whirred, processing billions of calculations per second, extrapolating millennia of celestial mechanics. He held his breath, his eyes glued to the screen, watching as a holographic projection of the solar system spun into view. The planets moved in their familiar orbits, a comforting, predictable dance. Then, from the outer darkness, a new celestial body emerged, Nibiru, depicted as the eight-pointed star, moving on its highly eccentric path. The simulation accelerated, compressing thousands of years into mere seconds. He watched as Nibiru approached, its immense gravitational field subtly perturbing the outer planets, then the inner ones. He noticed something else, something he hadn't anticipated. As Nibiru drew closer to Earth's orbit, a cascade of celestial events began to unfold. Not catastrophic collisions, but subtle yet significant changes in Earth's axial tilt, its magnetic field, and even its geological activity. Volcanic eruptions, seismic shifts, and climatic changes all seemed to align with Nibiru's periodic approach. The Sumerians had written of the great floods and the shaking of the earth, coinciding with the return of the heavenly lords. Could it be that these ancient catastrophes weren't random, but were orchestrated, or at least influenced, by the passage of Nibiru? A cold dread seeped into his bones. This wasn't just about the return of an ancient civilization, it was about the very stability of Earth itself. The Anunnaki weren't just gods, they were beings with the power to reshape worlds, to orchestrate planetary cataclysms. The thought was paralyzing, terrifying in its scope. He imagined the headlines, the panic, the collapse of societal order. His work, his discovery, was no longer a purely academic pursuit. It was a harbinger, a warning. He felt a desperate urgency, a need to scream his findings from the rooftops, to warn humanity of the impending shift. But how? Who would listen to a lone astrophysicist whispering about ancient gods and a cosmic clock? He zoomed in on Earth in the simulation, watching as the projected timelines showed significant shifts in historical periods corresponding to Nibiru's approach. Ancient civilizations rising and falling, monumental shifts in human development, sudden leaps in technological understanding. They all seemed to align with the cosmic clock. It was as if humanity itself was being guided, its history orchestrated, its advancements accelerated or decelerated by the cyclical influence of this mysterious celestial body and its unseen masters. The idea was almost too profound, too terrifying to grasp fully. Human free will, self-determination, were they merely illusions, a carefully constructed narrative within a grander cosmic design? He remembered a particular Sumerian myth about the creation of man, where the Anunnaki mixed their essence with that of primitive beings to create humanity, to serve as their workforce. He'd always dismissed it as a crude anthropomorphic explanation for human origins. But now, in the chilling light of his discoveries, the myth took on a new, horrifying literalism. What if humanity wasn't the product of blind evolution, but a carefully engineered species, cultivated and managed by these ancient celestial beings? What if our history, our very existence, was part of their grand experiment, their ongoing project? A sudden, sharp pain flared behind his eyes, a throbbing headache that threatened to split his skull. He closed his eyes, pressing his palms against his temples, trying to ward off the encroaching chaos in his mind. He opened them again, and for a fleeting instant, the lines of code on his screen seemed to shimmer, to twist into complex, geometric patterns, like an impossible fractal unfolding before his eyes. He blinked hard, and the illusion vanished, replaced by the familiar lines of data. But the residual image, the feeling of something else, something vast and intelligent, staring back at him from the screen, remained. It was as if the data itself was alive, pulsating with an ancient consciousness, daring him to look closer, to understand the deeper layers of its encrypted message. The air grew heavy with an almost palpable tension, as if the very atoms in the room were vibrating with an unseen energy. He felt a profound sense of awe, mixed with a chilling dread. He was standing on the precipice of a revelation that would shatter everything. The scientific puzzle of Nibiru was not just a puzzle of astronomy, it was a puzzle of existential identity, a riddle woven into the very fabric of human history. And he, Aris Thorn, was the one holding the key, a key that could unlock either salvation or damnation. The silence in the lab was no longer comforting. It was expectant, pregnant with the weight of untold millennia, whispering secrets that threatened to unravel his sanity. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has truly resonated with you. So strengthen this content, like it now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. The simulation continued, projecting centuries into the future, and Aris watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the trajectory of Nibiru showed an increasingly closer path to Earth. Not a collision, not an apocalyptic impact, but a proximity close enough to induce profound gravitational and electromagnetic disruptions. The predicted impact on global climate, tectonic plates, and even human consciousness was staggering. It wasn't a destructive event in the conventional sense, but a transformative one, a reset button pressed on the grand cosmic clock. And the Sumerian texts hinted at this, describing a golden age that followed Nibiru's return, a period of renewed knowledge and a closer interaction with the Anunnaki. But at what cost? What suffering would precede this new era? He felt a deep, profound sadness welling up within him, a despair for humanity, for its unwitting dance in this cosmic ballet. All our struggles, our advancements, our grand narratives, were they merely carefully managed cycles, orchestrated by beings whose understanding of time and existence transcended our own? He looked at the data, at the cold, impartial numbers, and saw not just scientific facts, but the echoes of ancient sorrow, the imprint of untold generations living out a script they never knew they were performing. The sheer scale of it was suffocating, stripping away any sense of individual significance. He pushed the simulation further, trying to find a definitive answer, a clear timeline for the next pass. The projections were complex, riddled with variables, but a clear pattern emerged. The next close approach was not centuries away, but decades, within his lifetime. The thought sent a jolt of ice through his veins. This wasn't a distant academic curiosity. It was an impending reality, a tidal wave of truth poised to crash upon the shores of modern civilization. He had to tell someone, he had to. But the fear, the immense debilitating fear of ridicule and professional ruin, still held him captive. How could he present this without sounding like a raving lunatic? He stared at the screen, at the shimmering holographic projection of Nibiru, the eight-pointed star gleaming with a malevolent, ancient light. The silence of the lab was broken only by the frantic beat of his own heart, a drum thrumming a rhythm of fear and revelation. He felt a profound sense of dread, as if a great slumbering beast was beginning to stir, its ancient eyes slowly opening, fixing their gaze upon a world that had forgotten its masters. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a silent hum that seemed to vibrate directly within his skull. He was no longer just an observer, he was a witness, a prophet of a truth so immense, so terrifying, that it threatened to tear the very fabric of his sanity. His gaze fell upon a small, intricate Sumerian clay tablet he had purchased years ago from an obscure online antique dealer, purely out of academic curiosity. It depicted a winged figure, not unlike the stylized representations of the Anunnaki, holding a staff that ended in an eight-pointed star, identical to the symbol now embedded in his cosmic data. He picked it up, feeling the ancient clay, the texture of a forgotten civilization beneath his fingertips. As his fingers traced the cuneiform script, a phrase, long buried in his memory from his early Sumerian studies, resurfaced with chilling clarity. The path is shown by the hand of Anu. Anu, the supreme sky god, the patriarch of the Anunnaki. The hand of Anu, was it a metaphor for divine guidance or a literal reference to the gravitational modulations, the unseen forces steering Nibiru? The implications were staggering, stretching the boundaries of science and faith. His mind reeled. If this was true, if the Anunnaki were indeed returning, guided by their own celestial instrument, then what was their purpose? Benevolent creators, or vengeful masters reclaiming what they saw as their own? The Sumerian texts, rich with accounts of both wisdom and wrath, offered no easy answers. The scientific puzzle of Nibiru was no longer just about its existence or its trajectory. It was about the intention behind its journey, the ancient will guiding its path. He felt a profound sense of powerlessness, a single human standing at the precipice of a cosmic revelation, holding a truth that could either enlighten or destroy. He looked at the projected image of Nibiru on his screen, the eight-pointed star, the concentric circles, the subtle gravitational ripples. It was all there, a meticulously crafted codex, woven into the very fabric of the universe, patiently waiting for someone to decipher its scientific puzzle. And now, he had. The final pieces clicked into place, not with a triumphant roar, but with a chilling, silent inevitability. The Anunnaki were not merely ancient gods or mythical figures. They were cosmic engineers, biological architects, and their grand experiment, humanity, was approaching a new, predetermined cycle. Their return was not a prophecy, but a recalculation, a precise celestial event etched into the timeline of Earth. And Aris Thorne, the skeptic, the scientist, had become an unwilling witness to the undeniable scientific proof of their impending re-emergence. He knew what he had to do. The fear of ridicule, of professional ruin, still gnawed at him, but it was dwarfed by the sheer magnitude of the truth he had uncovered. He began to compile his data, meticulously organizing the spectroscopic signatures, the gravitational lensing aberrations, the orbital mechanics, cross-referencing them with the deciphered Sumerian texts and the historical correlations. He would present it all, not as a theory, not as a hypothesis, but as an undeniable, scientifically validated reality. Let them call him mad, let them dismiss him. The data, the cold, hard, unassailable data, would speak for itself. The world needed to know. The silence in the lab was no longer just silence. It was a profound, ancient anticipation, a silent countdown to a future irrevocably altered by a past long forgotten. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has truly resonated with you. So strengthen this content, like it now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. The next morning, Aris arrived at the department head's office, carrying a worn leather briefcase that felt heavier than lead. "Doctor." Evelyn Reed, sharp and impeccably dressed, looked up from her computer, her expression a mix of irritation and mild curiosity. "Aris," she began, "your review is tomorrow. Are you prepared?" Her tone was crisp, efficient, completely devoid of warmth. She was a woman of facts, figures, and established protocols, a formidable gatekeeper of scientific orthodoxy. Aris knew that convincing her would be like trying to explain quantum physics to a brick wall, but he also knew she was the first hurdle, the necessary filter before he could even dream of reaching a wider audience. He sat down, placing the briefcase on her polished mahogany desk. "Professor Reed," he said, his voice raspy from exhaustion and nervous anticipation, "I have something that goes beyond the scope of my current research, something significant." He watched her face, searching for any flicker of openness, any crack in her armor of academic skepticism. There was none. She simply raised an eyebrow, a clear signal for him to get to the point. He took a deep breath, the stale office air doing little to calm his racing heart. "It's about the Kepler data, the exoplanet transits. I found an anomaly, a persistent, complex signature that doesn't conform to any known astrophysical model." Reed leaned back, her arms crossed, a familiar look of thinly veiled impatience on her face. "Aris, we get anomalies all the time. Noise, sensor glitches, misinterpretations. You've been working long hours. Perhaps you're seeing patterns where there are none." Her dismissal was almost palpable, a cold wave of doubt washing over him. He felt a surge of frustration, but he pushed it down. He knew this would be her reaction. He had prepared for it. "This isn't noise, Professor. It's too coherent. Or too deliberate, and it correlates with something ancient, something long dismissed as myth." At the mention of myth, a subtle shift occurred in Reed's expression. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine concern, or perhaps disdain entering them. "Aris, we are scientists. We deal with empirical evidence, not ancient folklore. Are you suggesting we've uncovered a lost civilization in deep space? Because that's a narrative best left to tabloids, not serious academic institutions." Her words were a stinging rebuke, a stark reminder of the chasm he was trying to bridge. He felt a sudden, profound sense of hopelessness, a chilling realization of how utterly alone he was in this discovery. The sheer weight of humanity's ingrained skepticism, its comfort in the known, seemed an insurmountable obstacle. He suddenly remembered a whispered academic rumor, a tale of a brilliant but disgraced professor years ago, who claimed to have found evidence of pre-human civilizations. He had been laughed out of the university, his career destroyed. Aris felt a cold dread, realizing he was treading a dangerously similar path. "Professor Reed, please," Aris insisted, his voice gaining a desperate edge. "Just look at the data. I've compiled everything. The spectroscopic analysis, the gravitational lensing aberrations, the orbital predictions, and the correlations with Sumerian astronomical texts are undeniable." He opened the briefcase, pulling out a thick bound report and a USB drive. Reed eyed the materials with a mixture of suspicion and professional obligation. She prided herself on being thorough, even with what she considered crackpot theories. "Sumerian texts," she repeated, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Aris, are you trying to tell me you've found Nibiru, the mythical planet X of ancient astronauts?" Her voice held a hint of amusement, a clear sign she thought he had finally lost his mind. He pushed the report across the desk. "It's more than that. It's a codex, a scientific puzzle. The Sumerians had an understanding of celestial mechanics that defies their technological capabilities. They described a planet, Nibiru, with an eccentric orbit, one that causes periodic, predictable gravitational and electromagnetic disturbances on Earth. And they represented it with a specific symbol, an 8-pointed star, which I've found embedded in the Kepler data." He watched her expression carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. She picked up the report, flipping through the pages, her eyes scanning the complex charts and algorithms. He could see her scientific brain processing the information, her skepticism warring with the raw empirical data he had painstakingly assembled. A subtle shift in her posture, a slight furrow in her brow, told him he had her attention, at least partially. "Gravitational lensing aberrations," she murmured, her voice losing some of its sarcastic edge. "You're claiming to have detected infinitesimal distortions caused by an unknown mass in a specific region of space." Her tone was still skeptical, but now it was tinged with a flicker of genuine scientific curiosity. This was her language, the language of hard data and complex physics. He leaned forward, sensing a tiny opening. "Yes, Professor, and not just any mass. One whose trajectory is subtly modulated, almost guided. And those modulations perfectly align with directional glyphs found in ancient Sumerian astronomical tablets." He slid the USB drive across the desk. "All the raw data, the simulation models, the translation notes, it's all there. I wouldn't bring this to you if I wasn't absolutely certain." Reed picked up the USB drive, her gaze lingering on the report, then back at Aris, her eyes unreadable. The weight of the moment hung in the air, thick and palpable. This was it. His professional life, his reputation, perhaps even his sanity hung in the balance. He suddenly remembered a phrase from one of the Sumerian tablets, translated by a notoriously obscure scholar: "The truth burns brightest in the shadow of disbelief." He knew that for Reed, this was not just a scientific claim. It was an assault on the very paradigm she had dedicated her life to upholding. Professor Reed inserted the USB drive into her computer, her movements precise and deliberate. The silence in the office was deafening, punctuated only by the soft whir of her machine coming to life. Aris watched her every move, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was the moment of truth. He had laid bare his most controversial, most paradigm-shattering discovery, and now it was in the hands of the most skeptical mind he knew. He felt a strange mixture of relief and intense dread. Relief that the secret was finally out, that he no longer had to carry its immense weight alone. Dread at the inevitable consequences, the academic storm that was sure to follow. She clicked through the files, her expression remaining stoic, unreadable. Aris could practically feel the gears turning in her mind, her formidable intellect dissecting his data, searching for flaws, for inconsistencies, for any logical loophole that would allow her to dismiss it all as an elaborate delusion. She opened the main simulation model, and a holographic projection of his refined orbital mechanics for Nibiru appeared on her screen, tracing its long, eccentric path through the solar system. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly as she saw the sheer scale of the celestial body, its predicted gravitational influence, and the disturbing alignment with Earth's historical timelines. "The correlations with Earth's geological events," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to her usual commanding tone. "And the axial tilt shifts. These are significant." She zoomed in on specific epochs, overlaying his predictive model with known periods of major geological upheaval and climatic change. The alignment was uncanny, disturbing. Aris felt a surge of validation, a quiet triumph amidst his terror. She was seeing it. She was truly seeing it. The data was breaking through her formidable skepticism, chipping away at her deeply ingrained preconceptions. Then she focused on the spectroscopic data, the raw Kepler readings, and the undeniable imprint of the eight-pointed star. Her finger traced the symbol on the screen, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. "A glyph in stellar data," she muttered, almost to herself. "This is unprecedented. If this isn't an artifact, if it's truly there." She trailed off, her voice thick with a mixture of disbelief and nascent wonder. Aris knew that for a scientist of her caliber, the word unprecedented was both a curse and a siren song. It represented the unknown, the challenging, the very edge of discovery. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has truly resonated with you. So strengthen this content, like it now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. Professor Reed leaned back in her chair, a long, drawn-out sigh escaping her lips. The silence that followed was different now, no longer heavy with skepticism, but pregnant with profound, unsettling realization. She looked at Aris, her eyes no longer dismissive, but filled with a complex mixture of shock, awe, and a terrifying understanding. "Aris," she began, her voice low and strained, "if this is legitimate, if this isn't some elaborate, incredibly sophisticated hoax or a catastrophic misinterpretation of data, then you haven't just discovered a planet. You've uncovered something that could fundamentally rewrite every single history book, every archaeological finding, every cosmological theory we possess." Her words, delivered with a newfound gravitas, validated every sleepless night, every ounce of doubt and fear Aris had endured. But that validation came with a chilling weight. He nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight with emotion. He felt a profound sense of exhaustion, as if the immense burden of the secret had been partially lifted, only to be replaced by the immense burden of its implications. Reed turned back to the screen, her gaze fixed on the Sumerian glyphs he had meticulously cross-referenced. The hand of Anu, and the directional vectors. "You're suggesting that these are not just mythological symbols, but encoded scientific instructions. A kind of celestial cartography, a guidance system left by advanced beings." The words seemed to taste foreign on her tongue, an articulation of concepts that defied her entire professional existence. "Yes, Professor," Aris managed, his voice still hoarse. "And the precision, the mathematical elegance of it all. It's too perfect to be coincidental, too consistent across disparate data sets. It implies a deliberate, intelligent design, a civilization with an understanding of cosmic mechanics far beyond our own, even now." Reed ran a hand through her perfectly coiffed silver hair, a rare gesture of disarray. Her usually composed demeanor was fractured, replaced by a visible tremor in her hands. She was shaken, genuinely, fundamentally shaken. The implications were clearly sinking in, the full, terrifying scope of his discovery shattering her carefully constructed world-view. "The Anunnaki," she murmured. The name, once a whisper of fringe theories, now a potential reality. They weren't just gods in ancient myths. They were something else, something real. And they left a scientific puzzle, a codex, hidden in plain sight for us to find. She looked back at Aris, her gaze piercing. "And you believe they're returning? That Nibiru is a celestial clock, marking their re-emergence?" Her question hung in the air, a loaded inquiry, an admission of her own burgeoning belief, however terrifying. Aris met her gaze, a silent affirmation passing between them, a shared understanding of a truth too vast to fully comprehend. The air in her office, usually sterile and predictable, now crackled with an almost unbearable tension, vibrating with the echoes of an ancient cosmic truth. Professor Reed stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the manicured lawns of Caltech, a world now seeming impossibly small and naive. Her shoulders were hunched, a posture Aris had never seen her adopt. She was usually a monolith of confidence and intellectual fortitude. The weight of this revelation was clearly immense, bending even her iron will. "If this gets out," she said, her voice barely audible, "the world will be thrown into utter chaos. Panic, religious fervor, the collapse of established institutions. It would be catastrophic." She turned, her eyes wide with a newfound fear Aris hadn't thought possible for her. "We're talking about the redefinition of humanity itself. Our origin story, our purpose, our very place in the universe, everything." Aris nodded slowly. "I know. That's why I came to you first. We need to be careful." We need to confirm this with absolute certainty, multiple sources, before we even consider presenting it to anyone else. It needs to be undeniable. He saw a flicker of his own scientific caution in her eyes, a familiar spark of professional responsibility returning amidst the shock. "Undeniable," she repeated, her voice regaining some of its steel. "You're right. We need an airtight case. But how do we even begin? The resources required, the political implications." She trailed off, overwhelmed by the logistical nightmare of such a clandestine, world-changing endeavor. "We start with the most robust observatories," Aris suggested, finding his voice again, a sense of purpose returning. "Hubble, James Webb. We need direct observation, irrefutable visual confirmation of Nibiru and its unique signature. And we need to analyze historical data from every major space agency, looking for overlooked anomalies, for echoes of what I've found." Reed nodded slowly, her mind already shifting into problem-solving mode, the scientist in her overriding the bewildered human. "And the Sumerian texts," she added. "We need a team of top linguists and archaeologists working under strict non-disclosure. We need to verify every translation, every interpretation. This codex, it could hold answers to questions we haven't even thought to ask." The two scientists, once adversaries in a subtle academic dance, now stood united by a terrifying shared secret. The magnitude of their task was immense, almost insurmountable. But the truth, the raw, undeniable truth, was a powerful motivator. Aris felt a surge of adrenaline, not of fear, but of grim determination. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger, with disbelief, with forces both seen and unseen that would seek to suppress this knowledge. But he also knew he couldn't turn back. He had opened the forbidden door, and now he had to walk through it, no matter the cost. The air in the office, once heavy with the weight of revelation, now hummed with a quiet, terrifying resolve. The collective heartbeat of two minds confronting the ultimate scientific puzzle. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has truly resonated with you. So strengthen this content, like it now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. The clandestine operation began, shrouded in layers of secrecy. Professor Reed, leveraging her extensive network and formidable reputation, secured access to top-tier astronomical facilities and a small, trusted team of experts, each sworn to absolute discretion. Iris became her shadowy operative, feeding data, refining models, and guiding the observational strategies. They initiated a global surveillance effort, not through conventional channels, but through carefully worded academic proposals and cleverly disguised requests for background noise analysis and long-period gravitational wave studies. It was a delicate dance, a constant tightrope walk between scientific transparency and absolute secrecy. The data poured in, an overwhelming torrent that Aris and Reed sifted through with relentless intensity. The James Webb Space Telescope, with its unparalleled infrared capabilities, provided the first truly compelling visual evidence. A faint, reddish-brown dwarf planet, far beyond the orbit of Neptune, yet unmistakably real. Its unique light signature, its peculiar orbital wobble, perfectly matched Aris's initial Kepler data and his refined models. And faintly visible in the extreme deep field imaging was a strange, almost artificial-looking glow emanating from its surface, a pattern of light that suggested structures, not natural formations. It was the eight-pointed star, etched into its very being, not as a symbol, but as a colossal illuminated complex. The truth was now undeniable, terrifyingly concrete. Nibiru was real. And it was not just a rogue planet. It was an immense, ancient artifact, a celestial city, a mobile base of operations. The gods of ancient Sumer, the Anunnaki, were not merely myth. They were the architects of this colossal vessel, and its return was not a random cosmological event, but a deliberate, orchestrated journey, Aris felt a profound sense of awe mixed with a chilling existential dread. He had always believed in the vastness of the universe, but he had never imagined a reality so utterly alien, yet so intimately intertwined with humanity's own history. The linguistic team, working in a secure, undisclosed location, confirmed Aris's Sumerian translations with alarming consistency. The Codex was indeed a set of instructions, a historical narrative, and a chilling prophecy. The Anunnaki had engineered humanity, using their advanced knowledge to accelerate evolution, creating a workforce, then guiding subsequent civilizations, subtly influencing their development, their technologies, their belief systems. The Golden Ages and Great Floods were not just natural disasters, but periods of reset, of recalibration, orchestrated by the Anunnaki through Nibiru's gravitational influence. Humanity was not the apex of evolution, but a carefully nurtured garden tended by cosmic farmers. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place as Aris cross-referenced the orbital projections of Nibiru with ancient maps and star charts from cultures across the globe, Egyptians, Mayans, even obscure Aboriginal tribes. All of them contained variations of the eight-pointed star. All showed a knowledge of a celestial body beyond the visible planets, and all hinted at cyclical periods of interaction with sky gods. The evidence was global, pervasive, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to connect the dots. The scientific puzzle was not just a local Sumerian phenomenon, it was a universal truth, encoded across human history, a testament to a manipulation so vast, so ancient, that it defied comprehension. The ultimate revelation struck Aris with the force of a cosmic hammer blow. Nibiru was not just a planet-sized vessel, a mobile headquarters for the Anunnaki. It was a self-sustaining ecosystem, a living world crafted with an intelligence far beyond human comprehension. The light patterns observed by James Webb were not merely artificial structures. They were colossal, organic technological constructs, pulsating with an unseen energy, connected to the very core of the planet. It was a symbiotic fusion of biology and engineering, a testament to a civilization that had transcended the conventional definitions of life and technology. The Anunnaki were not merely inhabitants of Nibiru, they were an extension of it, interwoven with its living systems, their consciousness perhaps distributed across its vast, intricate network, and their return, prophesied in the Sumerian texts, was not just a visitation, it was a reintegration. The gravitational and electromagnetic shifts that Nibiru induced on Earth weren't just side effects. They were deliberate preparations, a recalibration of planetary energies to align with their own. The subtle influences on human history, the accelerations in development, the periods of chaos and rebirth, all were part of a grand cosmic terraforming project, not of a barren world, but of a sentient evolving species. Humanity was not just a creation. It was an experiment in conscious evolution, carefully guided, meticulously manipulated, for a purpose Aris could only begin to dimly perceive. The scale of this manipulation was mind-boggling, a puppeteer's hand guiding the strings of an entire civilization for millennia. The final, chilling explosion of truth came from a newly translated fragment of an Akkadian text, discovered by the linguistic team. It spoke of the great harvest, a time when the seed planters returned to gather their fruits. This wasn't about benevolent gods returning to impart wisdom. It was about ownership, about a profound ancient claim over humanity itself. The Anunnaki weren't just creators, they were cultivators. And Nibiru's approach wasn't a warning, it was a signal, a countdown to a predetermined moment of reaping. Aris felt a profound horror, a primal scream caught in his throat. Everything he believed about human autonomy, about the unique journey of consciousness, was a carefully constructed illusion. He looked at the image of Nibiru on his screen, the colossal, glowing star city. its presence a silent, undeniable testament to a truth too vast, too terrifying for the human mind to fully grasp. The scientific puzzle was solved, but the solution opened an abyss of existential questions. Who were we, if not truly free? What was our purpose, if not our own? The answers, he knew, lay on Nibiru itself, on the approaching celestial titan. He felt a desperate urge to warn the world, to scream the truth from the highest peak. But who would believe him now? A lone astrophysicist, whispering about ancient gods, living planets, and humanity's cosmic masters. The silence in the lab was no longer just silence. It was the vast, indifferent silence of the universe itself, echoing with a truth that would change everything or nothing. If this content has opened your mind, comment below. I saw what he saw. This helps us understand who is truly seeking knowledge beyond the surface. Like the video, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell, because the next episodes will go even deeper. And don't leave without clicking on the next video. It's the continuation of this journey. The world outside Aris's lab remained oblivious, caught in its daily routines, its petty squabbles, its fleeting joys and sorrows. Coffee shops hummed with morning chatter, students rushed to lectures, and the rhythm of civilization continued its steady, predictable beat. But for Aris, everything had irrevocably changed. He carried a truth so immense, so devastating, that it felt like a physical weight, pressing down on his soul. The scientific puzzle of Nibiru, the Anunnaki CODEX, was solved. The numbers aligned, the ancient texts translated, the celestial object observed. The conclusion was horrifyingly simple. Humanity was not alone, nor had it ever been truly free. The final piece of the puzzle, a chilling echo in the Sumerian texts, spoke of the awakening of the sleeper, a prophecy that implied a return to a state of heightened awareness, a re-establishment of a direct connection between humanity and its creators. This wasn't just about the physical return of Nibiru, it was about a shift in consciousness, a pre-programmed recalibration of the human mind, preparing it for the reintegration with its ancient masters. The scientific puzzle was ultimately a cosmic blueprint for psychological and spiritual manipulation, an intricate dance of control spanning millennia. Aris felt a profound sense of loss, a mourning for a freedom humanity had never truly possessed. He stood by the lab window, watching the sunrise paint the sky with hues of gold and crimson, a beautiful, indifferent display of cosmic power. The distant hum of traffic, the chirping of birds, they were all part of a symphony he now heard with new, terrifying clarity, a symphony orchestrated by an unseen hand. He knew the world wasn't ready for this truth. It would shatter their reality, their religions, their scientific dogmas, their very sense of self. But he also knew he couldn't keep it a secret. The evidence was too overwhelming, the implications too profound. He had to speak, he had to try. The question lingered, a silent echo in the vast emptiness of his mind. What would happen when the sleeper fully awoke? What would happen when humanity finally looked up, not just at the stars, but into the eyes of its true creators, its ancient gods returning on their colossal celestial vessel Nibiru? The answers, he knew, were not for him to provide, but for humanity to discover in the crucible of a truth that would change everything forever. He took a deep breath, the cold morning air filling his lungs, steeling himself for the inevitable storm. The journey of unraveling the scientific puzzle was complete, but the journey of facing its truth had only just begun. The universe, he realized, was far stranger, far more ancient, and infinitely more controlled than any human could ever have dared to imagine. He could almost hear the whispers of the ancient ones, carried on the solar winds, a silent command reverberating across the cosmos, a prelude to a future that was already written. The secrets whispered across millennia, etched in clay and woven into the very fabric of the cosmos, now stand at the precipice of revelation. Doctor, Aris Thorn saw what was hidden, pieced together the impossible, and now the question lingers. What will you see? What will you believe? The truth is rarely simple and never truly forgotten. It merely waits for the right moment, for the right mind, to open the forbidden door. Write in the comments, "I saw what he saw." Subscribe to follow the next chapters of this forgotten truth, because this story, this reality, is far from over. And if this story moved you, leave your like. This shows that you are ready to hear what comes next.